We're at the turn of a new millennium, but let's jump back in time for a second. Before we worried about the machines taking over as the clock struck midnight, in 1993, compact discs first hit the market, Motorola released the first mobile phone, and Time magazine named the computer its Machine of the Year. And a Canadian filmmaker would challenge his haters with a film about a sleazebag who just loves television. And that film was Videodrome.
You already know my name. And you can see that I'm a machine.
I'm afraid. I'm afraid. Yes.
Welcome to the Final Girls podcast. I'm Anna Bogutska, your podcast host. I'm a critic and the author of Feeding the Monster, and in this series, I'm journeying through the intersections of horror and technology, the creepy, the weird, the ghostly, and the AI generated. On this season of the podcast, we are deep diving into machines. Every episode, I'm joined by a guest to discuss a film or two and how it captures our fears and anxieties around technology and the place it holds in our lives. This week, we're diving headfirst into the fleshy, pulsing core of Cronenbergian techno-horror with a double bill of Videodrome and ExistenZ, two films made 16 years apart that speak to each other like garbled transmission about the future of media, technology, video games, and how our minds and bodies are mutated by them. In Videodrome, a sleazy cable TV exec, played by James Woods, discovers a mysterious broadcast signal that infects the mind and the body. And in ExistenZ, which was released the same year as The Matrix, gamers plug into organic consoles and find themselves unable to tell where the game ends and the self begins. Again, released the same year as The Matrix. Something was in the air in 1999. Last episode, we plugged into the Wachowski cyberpunk classic The Matrix. This time, get your ports ready for Cronenberg. He's always been ahead of the curve, and with his new film The Shrouds coming to UK cinemas, there's no better time to revisit his singular, fleshy, and gooey take on techno-horror, and how it changed from the 80s to the 90s. Joining me this week is film critic and the author of Clinical Trials, a new book on the cinema of David Cronenberg, Violet Lucca. If you haven't seen either of these films, please note we discussed them both in great detail, so consider this your spoiler warning. And remember to subscribe and review the podcast over on Apple and Spotify if you enjoyed this episode or indeed this series. And you can find other films I'm going to be discussing over on our Letterboxd page, which is linked in the show notes. Always feel free to drop me a line about your thoughts on that ending of ExistenZ at hello@thefinalgirls.co.uk. And if you wish to support the podcast, you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/thefinalgirls. And with all that said, strap in and enjoy our conversation about Videodrome and ExistenZ. Violet, it's so nice to finally speak to you. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yes, I'm so happy to be here talking to you, and it's just there's thunder cracking right now, so it's a perfect time to talk about something spooky. Or upsetting.
I'm really jealous.
Maybe, yeah.
I mean, why not both?
Yeah.
I'm genuinely a bit jealous about the thunder because we're in the middle of a heat wave in the UK, and I'm not happy. That is the upsetting part for me.
It is. No, it's so moist right now. It's disgusting. You'll see there. Maybe you heard. Maybe that picked up the giant thunder crack. But anyway.
Oh, I can't believe you've already used the most disgusting word of all time. It's been like less than 2 minutes. I mean, we're going to talk about David Cronenberg's work, so it seems apt.
Yes. Yeah.
So, Violet, this is a question that I ask everyone when they come on the podcast for the first time. Mm-hmm. What is your own personal relationship with horror?
I really like horror. And I feel like and this is no disrespect to you, but I feel like there are certain people who brand themselves as like horror people. And then if a horror movie comes out, no one asks me about it. And I'm like, hey, I love horror movies. So basically I took a course in college with Linda Mockdad about horror film. It's like sort of like a genre approach to horror. And I really loved it. And I've always kind of liked I like the sort of the physical kind of stuff that happens, like just like comedy. It's a horror movie is kind of doing something to you physically. And that's kind of guaranteed unless it's really bad. So I enjoy it for that. And then also, I don't know, I feel like it's a great, it's a great medium for commentary, whether it's Bong Joon-ho, David Cronenberg, Wes Craven. Like, there are just so many great, or just stuff that looks weird and great, like Suspiria. You know, just sort of those bonkers Italian giallos. I know Suspiria is not a giallo, but blah, blah, blah. Anyway, but I'm a big fan, so I'm happy to be here talking about.
And talking about weird and wonderful as well, I wanted to have you on to talk about the two Cronenberg films that I'm covering in this series, because you've written a whole book about Cronenberg called Clinical Trials.
Yes.
So I'm sure kind of we'll talk as well about your book later on, but what is your relationship with the cinema of David Cronenberg?
Well, I think again, I was sort of introduced to his work in college, and that's where I really fell in love with it. You know, he had always sort of been hovering above it, you know, out of my periphery. Like, I'd heard of The Fly, I'd heard of other films that he's done, and then I got hooked, and I sort of went through a summer of watching Cronenberg films and sort of being taken in by the bizarreness, the strangeness, the tactility, the uniqueness of them, and the interiority of them. And, you know, I remember I watched Crash with my friend Carrie, and afterwards she turned to me and she's like, Violet, I think we just watched a porno together. So, and I was like, I think you might be right. But it was a great period of discovery, and since then I've been on the bandwagon. And so David Jenkins of Little White Eyes was nice enough to ask me if I wanted to write this book, and I was like, of course. What a thrill. Am I worthy? I'm not worthy. And then 2 years later, here we are. It is a big ass book.
It's big. It's beautiful. It's got a beautiful purple cover. It's really gorgeous.
Thank you.
Specifically, we're going to be chatting about Videodrome and ExistenZ.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering kind of where do both those titles sit in your Cronenberg canon?
Oh, man. So I've been touring around the U.S. with the theatrical release of The Shrouds, and I did a lot of book signings, and I would always ask people, you know, what's your favorite Cronenberg movie? And inevitably, like 8 times out of 10, they would say Videodrome. And Videodrome is just such a like the platonic ideal of a David Cronenberg film, because, you know, you have all this technology, it's very prescient, you have a lot of horniness, you have a lot of goo, you have some really great practical effects, and also it's very philosophical and very interesting in what it's doing, and there's also kind of this like bending of reality. And I think, and what's interesting, so when I think of Videodrome, I always think of ExistenZ, because so after Videodrome, that kind of made him this cult filmmaker, and he started getting more clout. And he went until 1999, until he directed another original screenplay. And so and that was ExistenZ. So there's, you know, Videodrome, early 80s, and then right before the end of the century comes ExistenZ. And they're very similar in terms of plot, and I think in terms of people battling reality or dealing with the deformation of reality because of technology. And then also, they're both extremely horny films. And what also I think is interesting is that the women in both of these films. So Debbie Harry in Videodrome and Jennifer Jason Leigh in ExistenZ. They both function the same way. They're kind of like a psychopomp where they're leading a naive guy through this underworld and kind of taking him through. And they're the ones with power, and they're very, I think that's for someone who's sort of slammed with or was back in the day slammed with the brand, misogynist. I think it's very unique that he would have these women who are super powerful, unapologetically sexy, and doing interesting stuff with plug and play, introducing guys to new things.
That's an extremely polite way of putting what happens to Jude Law in ExistenZ. Yes. But there's multiple threads there that I want to unravel in what you said. But let's kind of start with a little bit of context setting for Cronenberg himself, because you mentioned that Videodrome, which is kind of a quintessential film that that becomes a lot of people's first entryway into his work, that feels like a very quintessential Cronenberg film. Mm-hmm. You mentioned that it was sort of his breakthrough in many ways. Where was he career-wise when he was starting to make Videodrome, and how did that film shift things for him?
So this was in the early 80s in Canada, where they had this tax shelter system, which meant that any taxpayer could invest would get 100% return on investing their money to avoid paying taxes on film production. So there was just this giant explosion of Canadian film, and the only rule was that it had to be made before the end of that year, right? So that means that a lot of these productions were incredibly hasty, incredibly stressful, and Videodrome was exactly one of those, right? And I think you can kind of tell, if you look very carefully, that this is something that was assembled in the edit, and it's sort of being written as it's going along. I mean, the same was true with Scanners as well, right? Where there was this kind of mad dash to finish it and reconfigure it. And I mean, I think that makes it more dreamlike and kind of fun, as that this is being invented as it's going along. And of course, because maybe the script isn't entirely kind of finished. Maybe you don't really know what you're going to do. And so there were a lot of issues with like making prosthetics, doing these really elaborate special effects that ultimately were not in the movie. I think one of the crazier endings is that
I want to hear where this is going, because you're having a great time.
Yeah, this is really good.
I want to be in on a joke.
One of the endings that I don't think it was shot. I would have to look at my notes again, but I believe it was shot. So basically, it turns out that Nikki Brand, Masha, the other video dealer, I guess, and Brian Oblivion's daughter all reveal themselves to Max inside the Videodrome set at the end, and they all have penises. Just so, it's twist. It's very bizarre.
The twist is penis?
The twist is penis, and then I think they have an orgy. So
fun.
That is I don't know. It would. I laugh because I think it would have been a very different movie if that had been the ending. I don't know if it would be as classic as it is now, but it was. I mean, basically the film is him responding to his critics, because there was this very censorious attitude, not just in Canada, but particularly in his home province of Ontario, where there were different censor boards, and they would cut things out, and then those cuts might get passed on to another province, which would apply their own cuts. It was this really messy way of making a film, and it would be mangled, basically. And so Cronenberg was very opposed to this, and so he just made this film that's like, okay, yeah, guess what? I am a smut peddler. Like, what if it was a smut peddler? What if he is this total degenerate who's just like eating cold pizza for breakfast and picking up women on talk shows? Like, it's just, and he got James Woods, who's like the perfect guy for that.
Why?
I don't know. James Woods is a piece of shit.
Guy for it.
He is the perfect guy for it. That's what I'm saying. He didn't have to do any research.
He does have like an extremely sleazy quality to him.
Yeah.
Like a natural sleaze where you believe that this man has like not just a dark soul, but maybe like an absence of a soul.
Yeah.
And there's two roles I think of when I think of James Woods. It's Videodrome and it's Scary Movie Part 2 where he plays the creepy priest that has diarrhea in the bathroom.
Do you know that was originally supposed to be Marlon Brando? But Marlon Brando had like horrible pneumonia and he couldn't do it. That always makes me so sad. What could have been in Scary Movie 2?
But James Wood is so good.
He's very good. He's very good. I remember this.
So there's something you mentioned as well about how Videodrome is a response to his critics and kind of an extreme one at that. But then in the midst of that, especially with the character of Nikki, played by Debbie Harry, he creates this really powerful female figure. Do you think of her, or do you know if that was sort of a deliberate response to the criticism that he'd been receiving?
Well, Nikki is a really complicated character, right? Where she talks like this, and she has a radio show. And, you know, she's just like kind of oozing this sexuality, and she is what would then be considered deviant, and I'm using scary air quotes. She's into like S&M, and she likes to be hurt. She wants to be hurt. She's their first date. She's already got cuts she got from somebody else, right? She's sort of the classic idea of what a weak woman is, but yet she's incredibly powerful. And she's the one who kind of is luring, she's like a siren, she's kind of luring Max in, but she's also possibly leading him to where he needs to be, to a greater purpose than finding softcore pornography for a television station. So I think he was definitely trying to push buttons with her. And the way she plays it, it's very funny at times, but then also it has this other dimension to it that, you know, I think in the year of our Lord 2025, we can appreciate the nuances of
a character like Nikki. You know, we briefly have talked about the inherent sleaziness of James Woods, but what do you make of the casting? Woods, Debbie Harry, why did he cast these actors and how do they fare? What do they bring that's extra into the characters?
Yeah, so I think he said this throughout his career, but you know, casting is kind of this dark art that's hard to master because you want somebody who's right for the part, but they also have to be available. And the shooting schedule of something like this is insane, right? So I think Debbie Harry was she was a pop star back then. Still is, in my mind. And, you know, that was probably a way to get some money into the project, as it often is. And, I mean, Woods, he wasn't who he was now, let's say, in terms of visibility. And so I think we have this pop star who wants to become an actress and be taken seriously as an actress. And we have this guy who's kind of on the rise, with, you know, he's missed a new Hollywood glory, and now he's kind of right in the 80s and seeing where it takes him. So it's, they really do make a wonderful pair. They have this wonderful rapport. And although, I mean, Harry said she learned a lot from Woods in terms of acting and method and all this stuff. So it's kind of rare to have your first big role be something that good.
And something that has remained so good that doesn't feel like it's aged.
Absolutely.
And there's several films, Videodrome being one of them, that are often paired up with this word prescient. You know, it's like they knew something about where we would end up and how our relationship with media and technology has evolved. What do you think about Videodrome feels more contemporary now in the year of our Lord 2025 than it maybe even did in 1983?
Well, I think it just hits you early on where they're on the talk show and Nikki says, quote, "I think we live in overstimulated times. We crave stimulation for its own sake. We gorge ourselves, ... So it's just, that's the perfect synopsis of the internet era, right? Where we're just constantly like mindlessly checking TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, what have you. And just to see something, just to get a hit of dopamine, right? I think the phone, there are people who just instinctively pick up their phone and look at the light just to see if they have a notification. Like that stimulation is so important to us, and we're not as critical of it as we probably should be. And so I think, obviously TV and how it functioned in society was a little bit different than it is, than how our current relationship with smartphones. But Cronenberg, he was always a big fan of Marshall McLuhan, another great Canadian. And Marshall McLuhan is this media theorist who, he coined the term "the medium is the message." And in his essays, he sort of talks about technology as this extension of the human body and of the human mind. And I think if you're tuned into that and you have enough imagination, you can kind of see where we're going to go. Where technology is only going to get better. It's only going to continue to fulfill our desires more. It's going to become more of us. And so that's how you kind of end up with a film where she's talking about overstimulation when people just had 4 channels, right? This is even before like cable was a big thing. So it's yeah. I think that's, because Cronenberg, big fan of sci-fi growing up. I think, if you look at people, not just Asimov, but somebody like J.G. Ballard. Ballard was a huge influence, obviously, again, did Crash. So I think if you're on that level and you're kind of applying this schematic to the contemporary world, you're like, okay, this is what the world is. This is kind of a crucial part about how it functions. And I'm going to make a movie about technology. This is where you go. It's a natural extension, I think. And that's not to diminish to him to be like, oh yeah, duh, David Cronenberg. But it is kind of natural to if we, especially considering how technology was being made then, if you follow that logic, we end up where we are now. And
well, I think there's the relationship that the cinema of David Cronenberg has with machines, with technology, and the way that we interact with it, and the way that it changes not just people's minds, but their bodies, their physicality, their relationship to one another. It's in a lot of his films, from the very kind of outright sci-fi ones like The Fly, or even with the eroticism, the really dark kind of eroticism of Crash. Like, it's always there. Like, this technically modified bodies and lives. And Crimes of the Future, I think, would be like the third film if there was a trilogy that very explicitly talks about tech and techno body horror. It's Videodrome, ExistenZ, and Crimes of the Future, but I've already covered that film from a different angle. And I wanted to ask you kind of more broadly, what do David Cronenberg's machines look like across his work?
A little insectoid. Definitely.
Very gooey.
Very gooey. Definitely like organs, obviously. Crimes of the Future is the great sort of the culmination of this kind of design where it's an organ, maybe it's an insect, maybe it's both. And I think again, because he's looking at technology and he's a fan of technology. He's always like trying to troll people by being like, oh yeah, I'd watch Lawrence of Arabia on my my Apple Watch. He's just totally, he knows how to get press. Let's be honest. But also he's not wrong to say, I have an Apple Watch. I can watch a movie on it. And if I want to watch a movie on it, I'll do that. Because he is a technology geek, and his dad was also a technology geek. And so I think when we have devices that are trying to mimic, let's say, the eye, to replicate movement, to give us choice, to give us a thrill, like a horror movie does, that it becomes a part of the body. I mean, Brian Oblivion says it. I can't remember the exact quote, but he talks about how, when we see something on a screen, it's physically rendered on our retina. Like that light passing through, it forms an image. And so if we're thinking like down to that level of minutia, then yeah, of course, there's not going to be a boundary between the body and technology, and they're being fused together, sometimes willingly and unwillingly. And it's an interesting thread to explore and to say, hey, do I want to know where I begin and where this thing ends, or can we coexist together? And is it wrong? And is it because people want to change their bodies, right? For all sorts of reasons. If it's gender affirming, if it's changing the color of your hair, our clothes, all of these different, these macro and micro level things. And so if we apply that to technology, which we're increasingly falling in love with, then yeah, this is sort of where you end up. So anyway, to answer your question, they look like bugs.
No, there's you gave a more interesting answer to my less interesting question, because there's like, it's not about, I'm thinking out loud here, but the thing about the relationship between Cronenberg's characters and the machines or the tech, that some of it is made up. Like, the game in ExistenZ doesn't really exist. We've kind of gotten close, but it isn't real. We cannot, as of yet, enter our televisions just yet. But it's never about coexisting with technology for me. It's always about fusing yourself with it. Very physically, when Max kind of physically enters and puts himself through the TV, when he finds the gun inside of him, like, it's all about the body becoming the tech and the tech becoming part of the body. It's about eliminating the separation, which then becomes very gooey and very fleshy and very tactile, like you were saying. It's interesting that Cronenberg is, and I love his interviews because he can be a little bit trolly in the best possible way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where none of us, and possibly I think this is why we keep going back to these films, and newer audiences, younger audiences keep discovering them and being enraptured by them, because his tech, whether it's in 1999 or 1983 or 2022, is never sleek. Like, all of our technology, our smartwatches, our phones, the laptop we're recording this on, they're all like soft edges. Right. We've just sort of rounded everything off. We've sanded everything down. It's all retina screens and like really clean lines and one color. All of his machines, all of his tech, whether it's fused with someone or just exists on its own, it's like this throbbing, bulging, moist, gooey stuff. Even the guns in ExistenZ, I absolutely love kind of the way that he creates this.
Yes.
That's amazing. A bone gun.
I know, a hypoallergenic weapon. I mean, but that's what I think. Yeah. I think is great. And I think what you're touching on is so important, because we forget that we're goo on the inside. So, like we dress up.
Sacks of goo.
We have bones and all these things in us, and we do so much to pretend like that isn't true. And to the point that we don't a lot of people don't consider themselves animals, even though we're all animals, right? And so this sort of breaking that down, and obviously Cronenberg's experience as like a med student his interest in the study of bugs. All of these things kind of feed into that. But when you open up the inside and what do you see? So if you're coming up with these ideas before like Steve Jobs comes along, you're going to arrive at a very different idea, right? Because I mean, Steve Jobs was just so instrumental in making all of our devices, even the ones that are not for Apple, look a very particular way, to be very sleek and very to get a little bit psychoanalytic. There's, when you look at your phone screen or a retina, like your laptop retina screen, you see your reflection. And so that's kind of, even if we don't want to do like the accidental selfie camera, like up the nose shot, there is something comforting about seeing yourself in this device and being affirmed that, yes, this is mine and I can entertain myself whenever I want.
Cronenberg's tech doesn't reflect back.
Yes, that's right.
Kind of exists. It just mutates.
Yeah,
the people that interact with it.
Well, it reflects the part of us we don't want to see.
Nice. That's why you wrote a book about him.
Probably.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the reaction to Videodrome, because it's interesting to me when a film keeps getting revisited and shared kind of and becomes an image, like a standalone meme, a GIF, and Videodrome is full of them. Like even now, even people who haven't seen the film itself might recognize scenes. What was the reaction to it at the time, and how have you seen it, or how have you noticed it in the process of researching your book and writing and thinking about Cronenberg's work? How have you seen the reaction to it change?
So I think definitely at the time it was a Paramount film. It kind of got, the release kind of got messed up, and so what happened was it became this cult hit on VHS. This new technology, home viewing, which is so appropriate because it's all about the tapes, and television. And it's hard not to think of like Ringu, sort of, that also gained all this incredible steam because of, it's also a tape. But anyway, I think, so, at the time, it was, most people didn't know what to make of it. But then again, because there was this new technology that could, for people who wanted to stay up late and watch weird shit, they could. And so that's where it's gone. And I think because we are living in a world that's way more weighted to home viewing than to theatrical, I think that's part of the reason why it's only gotten more and more popular. And I mean, there are plenty of people who really don't, like, I think you said this before, that people who really don't know who David Cronenberg is, but they're familiar with images, or at least the idea of this movie. That certainly says something about shifts, because in 1983, you'd be hard pressed to find anybody who was like, oh yeah, that was so cool. When he shot the guy at the spectacular optical thing.
And it was, I wasn't here at that time, but it's particularly well known, I think, in the UK scene because of its association. It wasn't actually on the Video Nasty list. It wasn't one of the one of the 72 banned films, but it was, it could be confiscated. Even if they couldn't put you in jail for having a copy of Videodrome, you'd get a little slap on the wrist.
It was nasty adjacent.
Is that going to be the title of your second book?
Yes. No, that's good, actually.
It's good. And, before we move into ExistenZ, which is it's a really fascinating book, and the fact that these two exist is with so many other films in between that were adaptations or other people's scripts, but where do you see the legacy or the influence of Videodrome on other films and other filmmakers?
Well, I think I generally balk at the idea of body horror, and I think it's kind of like a weird amorphous term, and I really love the substance, but I don't think that's doing the same thing as this, right? I mean, you can sort of say there are certain parallels, but that's also what is great about horror, is that you can set it anywhere and make it about anything, and horror can be anything, which is so great and versatile. And it's not like, a cowboy movie where you need a cowboy, or a Western, excuse me, you need a cowboy.
It's not like there's a blueprint. It's not like there's a blueprint for, or a series of tick boxes for a body horror film.
Right.
Even within Cronenberg, who is often just sort of, credited as making it up. And, he's the grandfather, dad, I was going to say the daddy of body horror. I shouldn't say that. Even though he's often credited with coining that or popularizing it in some way, all the bodies and the grotesqueries and the body horror in his films looks completely different.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so singular. It's just such a singular thing. And then if you try to do it, people will be like, you're ripping off David Cronenberg.
Let's move on to ExistenZ, which, we've both mentioned it is his first original screenplay in quite a while. So the film comes out in 1999 alongside another influential fake reality, simulated reality film.
Oops. Just a little movie called The Matrix.
Just tiny independent film that nobody ever saw. But what connection do you see between Videodrome and ExistenZ?
Well, I think, he was clearly still thinking about the same issues, right? And reality and the body and sexuality and how technology can fulfill our desires in a way, desires that we don't even know that we have. I mean, I think like the game urges are like the perfect example of this, where it's like, I don't want to eat this horrible meal, but also I can't stop myself. And I think that's such a fascinating way to look at behavior, because so many, or at least I remember when I was in film school, people just started being like, well, it doesn't make any sense that character did that. And it's like, nobody's totally rational the entire time. And I think that's what I like about ExistenZ, is that it's this very it's very funny, but it's also exploring like how little control we have over life a lot of the time, and how it is often counter to our interests. We're behaving counter to our interests, and we just can't stop ourselves because we're not totally in control of the game, right?
And I'll admit, I've seen ExistenZ a couple times, and it is... I don't feel like people talk about it enough, and possibly it's quite complicated narrative structure of a game within a game, within a film, within a game, kind of is less clear-cut than something like The Matrix is. Yeah. It's a much more demanding story, even though it is almost exactly a mirror to The Matrix. Yeah. It's just there's not that much exposition here. How do you see those in parallel, those particular two films, The Matrix and ExistenZ? Because they're both exploring virtual realities, and they both have these several narrative layers to them.
Yeah, it's kind of funny to think of some alternative universe where instead of red pill, blue pill, people picked up on just having anal sex. Instead, and then everything would be so much better, instead of just like, we gotta break out of this, because that's the other thing, right? The Matrix is so, I think part of the reason why I haven't seen it in a long time, but it's very like goal driven, right? So it's like, okay, so we gotta break out, we gotta do this, we gotta do that, and then I fly away at the end. And ExistenZ is just kind of reveling in the absurdity of life. And I mean, it's obviously existence, existential philosophy. So it kind of, it's having kind of a wink with that, right? Spelling the capitalizing random letters in the title.
I mean, it's very emo of him.
Right. Yeah, it is.
Very 2002.
Yeah, no, and then the name of the the name of the fake game company in the film, Pilgrimage, right? And again, it's doing the they're doing the same shtick with the capitalization, and it's just very much like into eating itself and kind of reveling in the absurdity of these things. And I think The Matrix, again, more goal-oriented and way more serious, perhaps deadly serious. It's a little bit too serious for my taste, so.
I mean, I have a lot of time for The Matrix.
I know, I should try watching it again.
It's a good rewatch. Yeah, we just covered it on the show as well, but it's really interesting actually watching them borderline back to back and knowing that they came out in the same year and they have such similarities. But again, we're talking about Videodrome and how Cronenberg's machines are so fleshy and tactile and feel very organic and connected to the body, or like an extension or mutation of the body almost. Where there's a Matrix is much more, the Matrix, I keep saying it in this weird Spanish accent. The Matrix is more aligned with our contemporary idea of what tech looks like. It's sleek, it's reflective, it's all code, it's all black. But they both have a certain kind of a certain kinkiness and a certain horniness to them as well. And I wanted to ask you about this across both films, actually. And I don't think you do in your book, but not enough people talk about the way that Cronenberg's films interact and talk about sex. So how do you think Videodrome and ExistenZ both play around with sex? Both as imagery, sometimes just dick jokes, and also thematically.
So I guess a place to start would be that sexuality in Cronenberg's films starts with the premise, which is correct, that the man is not necessarily the dominant one. And that you can switch, to use a winky term. You can switch the roles you play, and you can play different roles. And, that sexuality is way beyond something like how it's portrayed in most films, where it's, heterosexual, cis, sex, missionary style. And all of his films, even The Shrouds, it's showing you something different, right? As that, there are many ways to be erotic, to express that desire, and to be physical with one another, and to feel certain things about one another's bodies. That, again, it's this emotional depth, kind of the emotional depth of sexuality and sensuality. And I think that is really important. And I mean, it's a very unique, I'll say that. And I don't think that it's talked about nearly enough. And I guess you could sort of say that's like the William S. Burroughs influence, and sort of how frankly his writing talks about sexuality and wanting to kind of sometimes control your partner, but the inability to fully do so. And so I think that's understudied. Hopefully more people will think about his films as very sexy films, or preoccupied with sex rather than just bodies.
Yes, and I think they're both sexy and preoccupied with sex. And, you used at the start of our chat the word horniness, which has been overused. But I think it's apt for him because alongside all of kind of the depth and the preoccupation and the openness, and even in his more not straight, but straight-laced dramas, like A Dangerous Method, which is his kind of biography, or more kind of biopic, I guess, of Jung and Freud and how they're intertwined with, I haven't seen this film in a while, so forgive me, I forgot Keira Knightley's character. Thank you. Even that is completely preoccupied with sexuality, with sex and our understanding and the effects that it has on people. But they're also funny.
Yes.
And for anyone who hasn't seen ExistenZ, it is funny. It is goofy funny. It is goofy fun. it wears kind of its sex jokes really lightly at the same time as being kind of interrogating numerous philosophical themes and what we are and what we are in relation to machines, what is reality, what is simulation. There is also a scene where Jude Law literally gets pushed against a chair and
gets a new hole.
Gets a new orifice. Gets a new hole.
Yes.
Courtesy of Willem Dafoe in a basement. Yep. And that's funny.
No, I know. I mean, the whole lead up to that is so incredible, where it's like he changes his uniform, and he was like, I thought you didn't have to do that. And he's like, no, it's a mental thing. Like, he's gonna perform better if he has a clean uniform on, and his name is Gas. And I mean, I think because what's fun about ExistenZ is that it's dealing in abstractions a lot of the time. Country gas station. Like, this is like early, what we think of as like early video games, right? Where everything's very like simple and there's not a lot of adornment. We have limited pixels to work with, right? And so, you know, they go to...
You have to get the point across really quickly and efficiently.
Yeah. So it's economical, and that's probably why there's more room for kind of this goofiness and philosophicalness. And I mean, I think there's even kind of like goofiness in the philosophical stuff too. Like it's 100% there. But I watched it with an audience. We watched it on print. I think it was the day after Valentine's Day, and I said it and I mean it. I think it's a great movie to watch. It's like a great movie to watch with someone you love, because it's like funny and sexy, and there are these sort of more profound things, places you can go if you want to, because, you know, they're your partner. You can do that sort of thing. But it's definitely an undervalued film, and not simply because it kind of sees where we're going with video games and technology. And video games is art.
Yes. Okay. So there's a couple of questions there for me. Mm-hmm. So we talked a little bit about how Videodrome saw or felt or intuited where we were heading with our need for technical simulation, like technological simulation and just media stimulation constantly. What do you think ExistenZ felt that was coming?
So the idea, you know, Cronenberg, sort of the genesis of the idea is that he did an interview with Salman Rushdie. And Rushdie this was when he had the fatwa against him, and he was in hiding, and he just sort of had to move very carefully from place to place. And Cronenberg did an interview with him, and they talked a little bit about video games, and that the idea that something that you wrote, an idea that you had, comes back to you in some way that you cannot control, comes back to you in a completely different way, was something that fascinated Cronenberg. And that's what happens here, right? That, you know, somebody makes a game. And then there are people trying to kill the creator of the game. You know, to pick up something as debased as video games in the late 90s and say this could be art. I think what the characters are kind of trying to escape from is reality, from the tedium of life. But yet they find themselves back in a form of reality that is strange and kind of unsatisfying in a way. And that at the end, you know, the final shot where the guy's like, is this still the game? Are we still in the game? Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't think that's too far away from where we are now, where people don't, you know, the stuff with like people falling in love with AI chatbots, and they know that it's a chatbot, and yet the chatbot is fulfilling something that their partner can't. And that's really, I don't know, I think we should probably regulate this stuff more. But it's just posing, and more than anything, I guess it's just posing like, what are we all trying to get away from? The banality of life. But ultimately, we can't get away from the banality of life because the greatest works of art supposedly emulate that. And that's where the profundity comes from. It's like, wow, this really is just like life, and how limiting that is to simply replicate reality as opposed to doing something more interesting.
The idea of replicating reality, though, and that being enough to call it art is kind of I think it's quite a subtly provocative one.
Yeah.
Because...
Well, I think let me say this. Let me say it better. So I think, ExistenZ is questioning the impulse to make art only exact replications of reality. Because in the film, it is kind of remarkable that someone has built this expansive world where you have all these different kind of strange choices, and like where do the other players go when they die? Like that's never settled. Like that's very ambiguous. There's lots of ambiguity around it. But there are people in the game world or worlds that are censorious, and they hate it, and they think it's a perversion to, rather than a perversion to show sex, it's a perversion to replicate reality, to deform it, to make people feel like they don't know where one thing ends and another thing begins. But of course, we're already past that point with like AI chatbots and people who have partners falling in love with AI chatbots, and thinking that they are living in a simulation and all sorts of other horrible things. But that's where technology will take us. It will take us to those dark places because that's where, maybe we don't realize it, but that's where we want to go. We want to feel special. We want to feel loved. We want to feel affirmed. And it doesn't matter if it's real or not.
The questioning of whether it's real or not is the thing that I think is really provocative.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in the film as well, because it's a film... I think it's more uncomfortable viewing than something like The Matrix, because it's a film of questions as opposed to answers.
Exactly.
Even the final line, you don't actually know if what you've seen is a layer in the game or the actual reality.
Yeah.
And if you watch it I think it's a film that really heavily rewards multiple viewings, because you then try to, the same as with a video game.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a really big gamer, but one thing I deeply appreciate about games and people who play them is that sometimes when I don't have the patience to have to redo a level over and over again. Yeah. But I appreciate that when people do, they find new ways of interpreting the same experience, the same layer of the game. And ExistenZ, in its narrative structure and the way that the players, particularly the architect of it all, Allegra,
maybe
Allegra and one of the layers. Allegra, maybe. Allegra, question mark. They know what all of the little loopholes, who's an NPC, who's an actual character, what this means, what you actually need to do to progress. Like all of these cheat codes in the game are impossible in real life, obviously.
Yeah.
But they completely bend the reality to their will, but in a much more subtle and funny way than in something like The Matrix, where it literally bends through bullet time and kind of special effects. This is a very much more light touch film than Videodrome, with the way that it deploys video effects. But I wanted to ask you as well about Allegra, because Allegra question mark, because we spoke about Nikki.
Yes.
The two of them are kind of in conversation with one another as these really complicated central characters. And Allegra is kind of a mixture of Max and Nikki from Videodrome, because she is the one guiding the innocent Jude Law through the layers of the game. But she's also the figure of power. She's the corruptress. She's the one who creates this game that someone has a problem with.
Yes.
What do you think of Allegra and the way that Jennifer Jason Leigh plays her?
Well, I also have to say that, Jennifer Jason Leigh was I think she was 36 maybe when she made this film, and Jude Law was in his early 20s. And so I love the idea of an older woman kind of doming this little dweeb. And that's clearly like it was
good for him as well.
I know, good for both of them. It's great. It's consensual, mostly. I don't know. Again, we come back to the Bioport installation scene, but I think it's I love how Jennifer Jason Leigh plays her because she's clearly having so much fun with it. Like she's somebody who is. She's in charge. She's like unapologetically in charge. And even at the end of the game, it seems like she's losing control, but she never loses control. Like she always finds another like gun and like shoots more people down and this and that and the other. And it just becomes this chaos and everything. The world kind of falls into itself. And then when we come back to what may or may not be the real world, she's still in charge. But, Jude Law's character is in on it, too. Like that I think, and they're this perfect little unit working together, and it's so romantic. They're kind of like romanticized terrorists, They believe in each other's love, and they believe in doing what they have to do. They believe in their ideology, and I think that's it's a really rich. I totally agree with you that it's a really rich character to write for anybody, but especially at that point in history for a woman, I think is great. It was great. And then also that, you can always come back to it and watch it again and think about these different elements of Allegra, with her little crimped hair and all that. And just know that she's not a girl boss. She's not a lean in woman. She's like actually feminine power incarnate, and nothing is going to stop her.
And she also has this. I found her particularly interesting to watch right now because we have been oversaturated with like tech gurus, tech entrepreneurs, and the way that they have amassed power, but also become very public and sometimes political figures.
Yes. Yeah.
So what do you make of her? And obviously that was not the lay of the land in 1999 when this came out, but how do you look at her from a contemporary point of view when the figures like Allegra Geller are just a dime a dozen and some of them are kind of like movie villains themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, I think if you sort of follow the logic that Cronenberg is following, right, where it's like, okay, so what if an idea you had came back to you? What if that idea was in a video game? So what does that make the person who makes the video game? That person is now politicized. The person who they may be politicized against their will. They may have not, they probably didn't set out to make something political, or maybe they did, but now it's political. It's out in the world. People are reacting to it. People are having all sorts of feelings about it, and feelings lead to thoughts, and thoughts often lead to politics. So I think, it's also very funny to watch this now and just be like, yeah, I could see that happening, because 5 years ago, you'd never be like, oh yeah, there's going to be somebody who's like this annoying tech figure that's going to be assassination worthy. And now, ? Ambiguous. I won't say more. I'm not trying to get arrested. But it is funny to see how, again, if you follow the logic and you sort of are familiar with human behavior, you do kind of come to these things that are absolutely 100% true and are happening right now.
And I'm curious because you use the word logic several times when talking about kind of the prescient elements of both films. Mm-hmm. What do you think is Cronenberg's logic? Because that is not a word that I see often applied to him.
So I think Because I think when you're writing a story, you can write a story that's completely different from what is around you. But what makes it feel real is that it obeys an internal logic of the story world, right? And I think he has a really good command of that, and he sort of understands how to heighten certain things in it, and to make it unique, to make it more exciting, to make it stranger, to express the ideas that he wants to by creating a certain logic for this world and pushing it and pushing it and pushing it, pushing it. So, but that when I say logic, that's sort of what I mean, is that internal story logic and that creativity. And again, it's hard, it's something. It's kind of the what if factor, right, of sci-fi, of fiction itself, that, how do you build one thing after another? And that's sort of what I mean by logic. And I think he has an amazing control of that, where he can build something, this parallel structure to the world, and then 40 years later it's real. Like, and it's like, he didn't set out to do that. He wasn't like, well, whatever, but like, he's just responding to people who are like, you're a disgusting piece of shit, David Cronenberg, for making The Brood. And he's like, all right, you gave me an idea. And then he's going at it. Like, that's, I find that impressive. So,
I mean,
I'm biased.
I've genuinely never thought about him and his work in that way, because it is reactive, but in a different way. And, they often say to just not engage with the criticism of your work, both negative and positive, because once you put something out there in the world, it's just like, just take it.
Yeah.
Do what you need to do with it. Yeah. I've said what I have to say. And it's definitely advice that I learned the hard way after going on Goodreads.
I have not looked at mine. I'm not doing that. I won't.
Do not violate. No.
And I'm not going to look.
Bad things lie that way.
And I'm not going to look on Amazon. I'm not going to do it, because I think, again, what also is impressive about Cronenberg is that he's very good at talking about his own work, right? Because he does have this internal logic. He has this understanding of what his movies are about, and so that sometimes makes it difficult to like talk about them. Because it's like, you already have somebody who's given the perfect explanation of this film. So what else is there to explore? And that's sort of what I was trying to do with the book. It's like, okay, there's so much going on in these films. What else? What else? What else? What else? Right? And I think that's fun. And even if you don't agree with it, it's kind of fun to go down certain avenues, which is also, that's kind of what happens in ExistenZ, right? You just go down different avenues and you find something. You find a dead guy with a weird accent.
You find Willem Dafoe with a gun.
Yeah.
You make a gun out of bones. Why not?
Right, yeah.
And, we mentioned this film a little bit briefly, but I wonder as well, how does ExistenZ set up some of Cronenberg's future films, like Crimes of the Future? So
Crimes of the Future was actually written around the time he did ExistenZ. So I think he was just sort of in this certain frame of mind. And so if you think of I think you're totally right to identify them as this kind of trilogy, that I think it sets up, because that's really, so ExistenZ was like his last, before Crimes of the Future, that was kind of like his last sort of classic Cronenberg film. Like after that, he did History of Violence, Eastern Promises, A Dangerous Method, and then Maps to the Stars. And he's kind of going further and further away, and that of course makes people be like, oh, this is late style Cronenberg. Again, I don't think so. You don't need to make up terms to sound smart. Just talk about the thing. But I like, it's sort of his for a long time, it was his last statement about things like creativity, about, the act of creation. And then with Crimes of the Future, that comes back in a big way. And so I think, I don't know, do a triple feature. Watch all three. See what happens. See how creative you feel, or drained, you feel afterwards.
To start wrapping up, I wanted to bring you back to a little bit more general and ask you about your book.
Okay.
Clinical Trials. Tell me about, you mentioned before that like so many things have been written and said about Cronenberg and his cinema, a lot of them by Cronenberg himself. How did you find, and I'm very interested in structure, particularly with books about, culture and cinema and other people's work. How did you come to the structure that you employ in Clinical Trials? Like, how did you find a new angle in Cronenberg?
So I definitely didn't want to write something about body horror. I don't subscribe to that. And I think, I was just thinking of my own experiences with trying to be creative, because something like Naked Lunch, right? Naked Lunch is all about the act of creation. ExistenZ is. Crimes of the Future is. So many of these are explicitly about what it means to be a creative person, coming up with narratives, expressing yourself, etc. And what I love about Naked Lunch is that it's so absurd and kind of dreamy and irrational, and that's kind of what creativity is. Like where do you go when you write? I don't know, like you hit this flow state and you're just kind of off. You just kind of go down these different paths. And so thinking about what is creativity, that sort of got me thinking about my own experiences trying to foster creativity in myself, and that led me to Carl Jung. And so I thought, well, looking over these different concepts Jung had, it's like, well, I guess this one kind of fits these films, and this one kind of fits these films, and these, and so then I kind of had a spine, right, for the book, because when I was writing it, when I was writing the proposal, somebody was like, look, you have to come up with a structure at some point. You might as well do it now with a proposal. They'll probably say yes to whatever you propose, but just do yourself a favor so you don't have to figure it out again later. And that's what I did. So I think, using Jung, which I think some people might find a bit heretical, because people really hate that guy. Sometimes I understand, sometimes I don't. I just thought it was an interesting way to kind of discover something, or to look at something from a different angle that is, and maybe it's valid, maybe it's not, but you can kind of have fun with it.
Did your relationship with Cronenberg cinema change after finishing the book?
I mean, I definitely. That's a good question. I mean, I feel like it's deepened, and I feel like maybe some of the things that I've questioned some of the things. I tend to see a lot of his films. I mean, as we've been talking, you can probably tell. I tend to see a lot of his work in terms of like where he was at in his career, because I think despite the weirdness and the goo and blah 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 blah, these are all ultimately like very personal films, very autobiographical or personal. Let's just say personal. Autobiographical, maybe not the right word, but. So, and for that reason, I see them as part of this continuum. And, there's clearly points in his life where he's interested in one thing and then another, and then something will come back. And so I find that fulfilling, because I think otherwise you might get off on a toot. You might go too far away from the ground, and you may miss something important. Because again, at the end of the day, it's ultimately a guy at a desk typing. Or writing longhand, or whatever. So
amazing. And Violet, before I let you go, is there anything about either one of these films that you wanted to bring up that we haven't covered?
No, I think I'm good. Okay. Thank you for the wonderful questions.
Thank you so much for the incredibly insightful answers. And where can listeners find more of your work online or elsewhere?
So I'm on all the platforms. I'm not very good at promoting myself, but I hope to very soon start a YouTube channel where I'll be talking about Cronenberg and other filmmakers, so I would advise people to stay tuned for that. You can find me on X, formerly Twitter. You can find me on Letterboxd. You can find me on Instagram. You can subscribe to my Substack. I'm on I'm on Zhao Hongshu. I'm on everything. So just look for me and you'll find me. I also have a website, violetluca.com. That's probably the easiest place to go.
And you can find Clinical Trials in all good bookshops.
That's right.